two mathematicians, a physicist, and an economist shared a house. Sounds like a great start to a good joke, and I'm still working on how it finishes, but no, it's not a joke. I was the physicist, Max was the economist, and the house was in Princeton, New Jersey, where I was absolutely delighted to spend 2 years with Max when we were both graduate students from 1989 to 1991. Looking back on it, that was not a bad time in the world. And in particular for Max, as a German, I think actually it was quite a good couple of years. For one thing, West Germany won the Football World Cup. And if you think, Mr. Intellectual Max was above being excited about the results of football games, think again. Max was absolutely having a blast with that. But the other thing that happened not long afterwards is that we learned that it would be the last time ever that West Germany would win the World Cup, because Germany got unified. And it was really touching to be there and watch the effect of this on Max when it happened. And I can also tell you that you didn't have to be German. I grew up in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, very far from the epicenter of the Cold War. Well, except for the business with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're 90 miles south of Cuba, but other than that, you would think we were very far away from it all, but no, it was actually quite inspiring, and it was sort of the first big example that it was possible for the world to change significantly, and actually surprisingly quickly, and actually sometimes for the better. So, you know, it's okay to be optimistic. This happened. It made a big impression on me, made a big impression on Max, of course, and it was delightful to be there with him when this happened. So I don't know whether it was because of this or not. Probably not, since I saw this before. But some things stood out about Max in graduate school. First of all, Max by far had the best attitude of anybody in graduate school that I knew. And by this time, this was most of Princeton graduate school. So no matter how hard it got, and I can tell you it got quite hard, there was no whining from Max, no complaining, no feeling sorry for himself. He regarded the whole thing as a big adventure and a huge opportunity, and he was not going to leave any stone unturned in maximizing this opportunity. And it was actually very good for me just to be next to that and have some of that rub off on me. In that place, it was easier said than done to have this wonderful positive attitude. I found my program in theoretical physics incredibly challenging. And I used to say in that place, the only time I felt like I was the smartest person in the room was when I was the only person in the room, and sometimes not even then. So it was very humbling, and it was really easy to doubt yourself and to despair sometimes even, and keep the faith. And there was one period very early on in Max and my time together where I was working on something for a couple months, and I was just stuck. I had literally gone nowhere for 2 months trying to do what I was doing, and I was actually wondering whether I was going to make it out of there in one piece. Max came home this night where I was pretty much at the lowest of my lows, saw me in some distress and sat down on the couch and asked what was going on. And I confided in him that, yeah, and boy, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of this place in one piece. So he looked at me and said, let me see if I can do my Max. You must remember, Andy, we are not here by accident. We are here precisely because we can do this. You must remember this and keep pressing, and it will be okay. So I also learned this was something characteristic of Max. He didn't just say, oh, cheer up or hang in there. He included some content. He gave me an actual rational reason to fight my self-doubt. And this, as it turns out, would happen often as he bestowed his little nuggets of wisdom over the years. And it had a really profound impact on me. I mean, it was a little bit surprising, very memorable, and then, of course, very useful, which were the characteristics of his nuggets of wisdom. So it really calmed me down, and I did keep pressing, and that same week I made the mini breakthrough that, for me, moved me past the Rubicon to the point where I was now quite certain that I was going to make it out of there in one piece. And I won't forget that, because it's an amazing knack to know exactly what to say to somebody to get them to to get something useful out of the comments. So another thing that stood out about Max was his high energy. And of course, in this place, there were lots of people with very high energy, but Max was extra special. Early on in our stay together, I discovered that he was writing a book, or more accurately, he was preparing the second edition to a book he had already written, a textbook on economics. This blew me away. Who writes a textbook while they're still in school? I mean, you just don't do that. So it was, aside from being just impressive in and of itself, it also highlighted something about Max, which I learned, which was about him, which was that it was very important to him to educate people. He was not just there to have fun learning all the wonderful new stuff that he was learning in his program. He felt obliged to do his best to pass it on. Even from that very early stage, he wanted to educate people. And yes, I mean, really, who writes a textbook when they're in school? So this educational tendency continued to play, apparently as a hobby, I guess. He decided that a good thing to do might be to make sure that his physicist housemate with his head in the clouds probably could use some basic education about the real world of economics and finance. So Max, over the next couple of years, tried to make sure that I didn't leave Princeton without a clue about this real world of economics and finance. So it started with some required reading. Andy, you must read this book. It's called Liar's Poker. From this book, you will learn everything you need to learn about the world of finance on Wall Street. And I can promise you it's very entertaining. So yes, great choice to educate a physicist with his head in the clouds. I read the book. It was entertaining, and perhaps embarrassingly, it still forms the basis of my rudimentary knowledge of the world of finance and economics. Once I had done the prerequisite reading and Max was convinced that I was receptive, I then got a pretty steady stream of nuggets over the next couple of years. some of which I can relate to you now. And Max, I don't know if you remember any of these, but I'll look at your face and see whether, the ring of recognition comes up or not. So one night there were some rules of thumb about risk in investment. Andy, if you have very little money, you might as well take risk. If you have just enough money, you must not take risk. But then if you have a lot of money, you must take risk. So this sounded pretty good to me. So I told Max, what about if you have absolutely no money at all? And Max looked at me for a few seconds and said, I suppose then it doesn't really matter what investment strategy you follow, since of course 0 times anything is still 0. So your first job, Andy, is to go from having absolutely no money to very little money, and then my rules of thumb will take you from there. So another night was loans and debt. Andy, in order to get a loan, you must prove that you do not need one. So this sounds sort of funny, but actually, over the decades that followed, I found this to, in a lot of cases, be literally true. For example, in Silicon Valley, if you have a venture and you're trying to get funding, if you really need this funding and you will die without it, you will either not get the funding or you will get really lousy terms on the funding. If somehow you are managing to turn a profit and you don't really need the funding, then you'll be showered with fantastic deals and offers from venture capitalists who want to give you funding. So the rule, of course, also had a corollary. Andy, if it becomes suspiciously easy to get a loan, you must be suspicious because something is very wrong. And so it was decades later, in 2008 in America, when it was possible for a house pet or a dead person to get a loan to buy a house, I got suspicious that something might be wrong. I even had a personal experience with this where I was in my bank one day and they aggressively pressured me to take a mortgage to buy a house that I didn't even want, and I had no business with this mortgage. I let them give their arguments, and halfway through I asked them a simple question: what happens if house prices go down? And the answer was, astonishingly, they don't. At that point, I walked out of the room, withdrew all my money from that bank. This was countrywide, by the way, which we all know what happened to. And moved all to cash. This was summer 2008. And as we now know, I didn't have long to wait. And so Max's corollary after 2008 and his earlier rules about risk finally allowed me to move from almost no money, very little money, to just enough money. And, maybe we can have a talk later to see what threshold I have to be, where I have to invest again, where I have to risk again. Okay, so there was one anecdote that did, however, convince me that perhaps after all, Max was cut out for the world of finance, and I should stick to the world of science. And it was one morning when I came out into the living room and Max was on the couch discussing with a friend the price of some stock of some company that apparently had dropped dramatically that morning. So I listened to them for a while I was getting a drink in the kitchen, and something about the conversation didn't make sense. So I asked Max, wait a minute, did you say the stock price of this company dropped? And Max said, that's correct, Andy, quite dramatically, in fact. And I said, but didn't you also say that they beat expectations of the analysts? And he said, that's also correct, Andy, but they beat expectations by less than expected. So, okay, if that makes sense to you guys and you don't think it's that funny, you're cut out for the world of finance. And if you think that, that it really is sort of strange, then maybe you're like me and you'll leave it up to Max. So I'll defer to him on that. Okay, so when Max asked me to talk for some minutes, he actually asked me to roast him. He's, according to him, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I thought, okay, but honestly, Max is a tough guy to roast, at least from those 2 years. I mean, there just wasn't any bad or ugly. So what am I going to say that can even, that would even slightly embarrass him? So this is the best I can come up with, and sorry if it's not that incriminating, but there was a time once where I saw Max make a terrible deal, and this deal came about because we, as housemates, realized that if we did not make a strict schedule for the house chores, then the house would pretty much fall apart. And it wouldn't be good. So we made this schedule of house chores that was to go actually for the whole year. And early one Saturday morning, Max showed up at my bedroom door. I was still in my bed, and Max was in the doorway. He was wearing boots, shorts, a T-shirt, and he was holding a straw hat in his hand and looking extremely anxious. And I was looking at him wondering, what the heck is going on here? So Max said, "Andy, I see that today, this weekend, your chore is to mow the lawn." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "Actually, I could mow the lawn for you. If you don't mind, we could switch chores." And so I was thinking, okay, what's your chore, Max? And he said, "I was supposed to clean the bathroom." So I thought for a minute, I was like, wait a minute, it's going to take me an absolute maximum of 15 minutes to clean this bathroom, and he's going to be out there for 2 hours in the hot sun mowing the lawn. Is he crazy? So are you sure, Max? You really want to switch mowing the lawn for cleaning the bathroom? And Max, still looking really anxious, like he was terrified I would refuse, said, "Oh, absolutely," and then proceeded to say how good he was at mowing the lawn, how much he loved to mow the lawn, how it was great exercise, and he really didn't mind. And so eventually I was like, okay, all right, you mow the lawn. And yeah, sure enough, I got up, it took me 10 or 15 minutes to clean the bathroom thoroughly. And I was sitting in the couch on the living room looking outside, and Max was not even halfway through the front lawn. And I just sat there wondering, what the heck is Max thinking? So he finished mowing the lawn, seemed quite happy, and a month or so later, the same thing in the rotation came up again, and there he was in the morning asking to switch mowing the lawn with the bathroom. So I had to ask, I'm like, you do understand, Max, that's a terrible deal for you. It takes you 2 hours, and it takes me 15 minutes. So he finally admitted, yes, Andy, I understand it's not rational, but I just really have a problem with cleaning bathrooms. I just don't like it. So I'm really good with mowing the lawn, so if we could make this switch permanent, that would be fantastic with me. So we made the switch permanent, and I can assure you all that if you ever need to drive a hard bargain with Max, all you need to do is contrive a situation where he is obliged to clean the bathroom, and he will trade almost anything to get out of this job. And yeah, that really is, that was the only thing that I can think of that from those 2 years that I could get anyone even to have a chuckle at Max. He was an absolute delight of a housemate for 2 years. Obviously one of the most memorable, but from all the nuggets of wisdom that he dropped on me, that he bestowed me with, which were always very clever and memorable and useful. And I have thought about him often over the years, but just somehow, we are all busy and we go in our separate directions. And I'm incredibly happy that this opportunity came up and I was able to come out and see Max again after 33 years. And Max, you don't look that different. You're a little bit thicker, but if I bumped into you in the train station, I would recognize you. So it's happy.